Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. If any of you have been following the movement around self-driving cars, the industry, and all the startups, Chris will need no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. The first time I actually met Chris, he was on stage and I was in the audience. It was TED 2013.
Really?
And yeah, exactly. Yeah. You were pretty good. Chris gave a talk about self-driving cars, which at the time was a pretty abstract concept, to say the least. Chris, turns out, had been working already for 6 or 7 years, I think, on self-driving cars. He was famous for the original work done at Carnegie Mellon University at the DARPA Challenge, where they made the first sort of suburban and urban assault vehicles that drove themselves.
That was not what we were doing.
If I had a photo for you, I could show you one that was flipped upside down. He then joined Google, where he led the self-driving project there, and he was CTO of the program until 2016. And finally, after a lot of cajoling from a lot of venture capitalists like me, he decided to launch his own company to do it, which is Aurora. I've had the fortune of being on Chris's board for almost 3 years now. Some of us like to call him the Henry Ford of self-driving cars. He gets embarrassed when I say that, but
Excellent.
It's okay.
It's going to be that kind of talk.
And so it's a real privilege to actually be able to put him on the spot today and ask him some questions. So, Chris, I'm going to start with this. There have been a lot of promises made about this technology and when it's actually going to be ready. There are people right now out there who are saying we're giving rides, commercial rides to people with it. You are known for taking a bit more of a conservative position on when the technology is actually going to be ready. So, when is this thing actually going to be ready, and when is somebody from the audience here going to be able to flag a Uber that has a self-driving system in it and jump in and drive around?
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Mike. And it's a privilege to be on stage with you. A lot of fun. So yes, I've had the privilege of working in this space for 17 years, which means you should have found someone smarter and better to fund. But I think it's exciting to see, right? We've been working at this technology for a long time, and we're now starting to see it on the cusp of being commercially viable. So if you go to Arizona today, and you're one of the fortunate few, you could get a ride in a car with nobody behind the steering wheel. The team that I helped build at Google is doing that, and that's really exciting to see. I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see hundreds to small thousands of these vehicles out in the world. And there'll be parts of fleets, and those fleets will be moving people, and they'll be delivering goods. And that'll be a chance for us to kind of get over that MVP hurdle and understand, do we have a technology that works, and start to find product market fit, start to understand the business model, and then, start to see it happen. And then over the second half of the coming decade, we're going to see this technology really start to scale and have a much broader impact in people's lives.
Now, everybody knows that there's a lot of players in this business. There's Google, which has now been renamed Waymo. Uber's doing a program. There's Cruise. There's Zoox. There's all these. Talk a little bit about the philosophy that you took in building Aurora and how you are different than a variety of these other players in the market.
Yeah, so I think like the different part comes back to like we know what we're doing. We think that's one of the differentiators.
Important, I would say.
It matters. So we've been really fortunate to pull together this amazing group of people who have done this before at different places. And so as we're building Aurora, we really think about it as version 2.0 of the technology. So I had the privilege of leading the Google team for many years. One of my co-founders, Sterling, he was at MIT doing this type of research, and then went to a couple places and went to Tesla and launched Autopilot and Model X for them. Drew Backnell is a Carnegie Mellon professor in machine learning and robotics, and helped found the Uber ATG and helped get that program off the ground. And so the three of us kind of understand what it takes to solve this problem, and have got this kind of scars to prove it. And so as we're building technology now, we're thinking about what do you have to build to actually make a product, not, how do I get over the next little hump in the road that we might discover out there testing. So I think that's a big differentiator. And then we've got, we've made some really cool progress on virtual test tools, so we can develop much more quickly than we could a decade ago, which is empowering. And then we've bought this company that makes this really fancy Lidar that unlocks our ability to see further than other people can, and not just see further, but see better, and that we can see not just where stuff is in the world, but how fast it's moving towards us or away from us instantaneously. And we think that really unlocks the power of what we're building.
Now, one aspect that's somewhat different about Aurora is that you're an independent company.
Yeah.
And many of your competitors are subsidiaries of big auto companies. Cruise is a subsidiary of GM. Argo is a subsidiary of Ford. You have Waymo that's part of Google. But you've chosen a path of staying independent. Why is that an advantage? Or maybe it's a disadvantage. Why have you
definitely not a disadvantage.
Why have you chosen that path, and what are the pros and cons of it?
Yeah, so we've been building the company from day one as an independent company, right? We didn't build it with smoke and mirrors to flip it. We built it because we believe in our mission to deliver the benefits of self-driving technology safely, quickly, and broadly. And the way to do that is to, A, focus on the thing we can do better than anyone else in the world, and that is build the driver. And to have that kind of focus, it means we've got to do one thing, right? We don't want to be part of some tech company that's making money selling ads or phones or whatever. Let's have a business that's really about the thing we care about. And we think that focus is a power. And then beyond that, that driver that we're building, we think can impact the world broadly. It can drive little compact electric cars. It can drive minivans. It could drive box trucks. It could drive big Class 8 trucks. And so we can build a platform that supports all parts of the transportation ecosystem. We can partner with our vehicle partners, whether they're making trucks or cars, and support them in building their business. And then we can support the people who use drivers and need to get something from one place to another, whether it's a person or a thing. And so whether that's a taxi company or Uber or Lyft, we can support them. Or if it's a logistics company or a shipper like an Amazon or a FedEx or a Google or a UPS or a Walmart. And by being independent, we can actually work across all of those companies, which we think is really important to having the impact in the world we want.
Now, there's a lot of sort of, I'd call it micro-segmentation that's happening in the industry, where people are saying, oh, I'm doing self-driving trucks, and I'm doing self-driving urban delivery vehicles, and I'm doing robo-taxis. And so is that a valid segmentation? Is it really that different? Or is it, you're obviously not taking that approach, so.
Yeah, so on the one hand, focus matters, right? We believe that, and so if you can pick a product and really delve into that by itself, then, I can see some advantage to that. We think that the right path is to build a driver, because really the hard part of the self-driving problem is not plugging it into the car. And being able to speak Japanese if it's a Toyota and speaking German if it's a VW. The hard part is understanding the world around the vehicle and figuring out how to move through it. So let's focus on that, and then let's leverage solving the hard part of the problem by doing a bit of work across these different applications. So we think that's the right path. One of the ones I think is kind of entertaining is. Entertaining is not fair, but one of the ones where I think the thesis is flawed is trucking. So a couple of years ago, the wisdom was, hey, we're going to go build a self-driving truck company because that's way easier than building something to drive around downtown San Francisco. And the problem with that thesis, of course, is that most of the time they're right. If you drive from here to LA down I-5, not a whole lot happens. It's pretty easy. The problem is that sometimes it does happen. Something interesting does happen. And when it does, if you're 70,000 pounds of load moving at 78 miles an hour, the kinetic energy is profound. If you compare that to two cars bumping into each other at 25 miles per hour in a neighborhood. So it's higher risk. And then the other thing is, most of the time nothing happens. And if nothing's happening, then you're not learning anything. And so you're not taking that opportunity to advance the technology. So again, if you take I-5 from San Francisco to LA, right, maybe one thing interesting happens or nothing. if we spend time driving down downtown Palo Alto or Redwood City or San Francisco, basically once a minute something interesting happens. So we're learning orders of magnitude faster than folks in the trucking space. And so we think as this Aurora driver, we'll learn where it's easy to learn rapidly and safely to learn rapidly, and then we'll be able to apply that into things like trucking.
That makes a lot of sense. One of the things that's hard about this business you're in is measuring progress.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm selling a SaaS product that has subscription, I can just count the number of subscriptions or the growth rate or whatever.
Yeah.
But you're working on a pretty fundamental technology, which takes a long time to build. And so there's a bunch of metrics out there that people cite, right? They talk about numbers of miles driven. They talk about disengagement rates from practice drivers and whatnot. Are those the right ways to measure progress in the industry? How are you doing on those?
Yeah.
If you want to comment on that.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
should we be looking at an entirely different way of measuring progress?
Yeah, we don't think those are great numbers to look at. And I can tell you kind of where they came from. So way back in the day when I was running the Google program, we had a bunch of cars out driving. And so we had a bunch of miles. And so we said, oh, we drove a bunch of miles. And everybody was excited. And then that kind of became the de facto way of measuring it. In practice, we think that's a terrible way to measure it because, one, again, if take the I-5 example, driving down I-5 for the most part is not that hard. And so you don't learn much. And so, you know, maybe it works really well there, but that's not actually going to help solve the broader driving problem. And so at Aurora, our strategy is be super efficient about the way we use our testing on road. Go to the places where we can learn rapidly. That means that we're going to end up disengaging more often because it's a more interesting environment and we're learning. And then the other is to really put a bunch of emphasis on virtual development tools, virtual testing tools. So, a really interesting number. So our vehicles now can make left turns across traffic, so unprotected left turns. This is one of these hard things to do because you have to estimate the distance in traffic, you have to find gaps and make the turn. Well, for us, we didn't just kind of throw it out on the road and hope and see what happened. We first had our human drivers go out and make a bunch of these maneuvers so we can kind of understand the characteristics of them. And then we built a bunch of simulations and different tests that allowed us to understand, to develop software against. And in fact, we made something like 2.25 million left turns in simulation before we ever actually tried it on the real world. And so, you can imagine if it took us 2.5 million iterations, how long it would take us to have a car, drive around the block and learn. And B, by doing it in simulation first, we didn't have to put the public at risk. We didn't have to put our team at risk. We could try all kinds of things out. So we don't think the metrics that are out there are really, the right ones to use. Internally, we look at all kinds of things. We measure all sorts of stuff. We measure how long does it take us to take software and put it on the car because that does affect the cycle time. We measure, we have this whole suite of simulation tests, both for kinodynamic simulation of the movement of the car, but also simulation of sensor data. And we ask, how does the vehicle perform against those? And we can kind of pre-develop tests. And then as we're thinking about rolling a feature out, have confidence at what limits we can put on it in the real world.
But realistically, if you're an outside observer, because a lot of the things that you're talking about there are internal measurements, you're not going to necessarily share them with the rest of the world. So if you're an external observer to this industry, what should you be paying attention to?
Yeah, and it's extremely difficult, right? I look out at the other folks working in the space, and I have a sense of where they are, but it's hard to measure objectively. I think you look at the quality of the team. Because that's the horsepower that's going to ultimately execute. And then you look at, the thoughtfulness of what they put out in the world about how they're solving the problem. I think those are kind of the best ways to look at it.
Okay, so you were one of the originators of the Lidar usage of Lidar technology. I'm going to assume that most of the audience knows what Lidar is. If not, there's always Google for you.
Yep.
There's another very famous person in this industry. His name starts with Elon, who says that LiDARs are stupid. Humans drive with eyes.
It's a fool's errand.
Cars should drive with cameras.
Yeah.
Can you please respond to that?
Please respond. Thanks, Mike. I'd be happy to. And there's some reporters here, right? So I disagree respectfully. So it is very beguiling, right? People drive around with two eyes. They're obviously not Lidar. And so there's an existence proof that it can be done. I actually latch onto a different quote, which was by Alex Kaparthy, who said, Lidar is a crutch. It's a way to avoid solving some problems with the camera. And I say, exactly. Right? Like, we are not scientists about this, right? We're not purists. We're actually trying to get a product out into the market to make the roads safer, to make them more accessible, to make the more efficient and less costly to get goods around. So we're going to find whatever technological advantage we can, right? I think about, we're pretty convinced the right way to travel is on things with wheels, whether they're bicycles or cars. Well, it turns out, I was born with legs. Probably many people here were born with legs, and right, that's what nature evolved to get us around. So, if we said that we shouldn't drive cars because they don't have legs, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense.
Very fair. We got 5 minutes, and I want to ask you 2 questions, Chris. The first one, it's a bigger issue that people often sort of brush aside when they're talking about AI and machine learning, but the fact is that the technology you're developing will endanger the jobs of people who drive today. Truck drivers, taxi drivers, and so forth. And that's their livelihood. How do you think about that problem?
Yeah, I think first it's real. That we're developing a technology that I deeply believe will have a massively positive impact on society. If you look in the US at 38,000 Americans who died last year on our roads, globally 1.25 million people, the status quo is broken. If you look at the accessibility, right, for 6 million Americans, they don't have the same privileges of getting around that many of you here do, that you can get in a vehicle and drive it. So giving them access is profoundly important. We can reduce the costs, right? So traffic accidents in the US are something like an $800 billion to $1 trillion drag on the US economy. So there's a massive economic, social, personal benefit to self-driving vehicles. At the same time, there are people whose livelihood depends on it. And it is a really tough conversation around kind of the broader good of the many over the few. And how do we, as a society, come together to support those people and transition them? Now, at the same time, there's a lot of room for hope here. So one example where automation came into industry and actually increased the labor pool is the automated teller. So when the ATM machine was invented, the concern was that suddenly there'd be this whole class of people, bank tellers, who would not have jobs anymore. And what happened was, because the ATM made it cheaper to open a branch, there were more branches. And the branches needed more bank branches. There was more bank branches, so there was more people employed as tellers. And the tellers moved from basically the L side of it, right, just their job being to effectively take checks in and hand money out, to actually creating value for the companies and selling additional products and whatnot. So there's now more bank tellers employed today than there was prior to the ATM being invented. And I think in our space, by reducing the cost and friction of transportation, by making it safer, there will be an elastic effect where we expand transportation to some degree. And I think that will create all kinds of new opportunities. But we have to find ways to support these people through that transition. The last thing I would end with, maybe two more points. So one is, many of these jobs are pretty tough, right? If you think about truck driving, there's a 70,000 person shortage of truck drivers in the United States. So it's not a particularly desirable job for most people. And then the life expectancy for people who drive trucks is lower than the average substantially. And so we should be kind of asking the question over the long term, is this a job we really want people to do, or is this a job where we'd rather find ways to automate it and allow those, that part of society to operate somewhere else? So it's a difficult question. Yep. It's one that we can't solve by ourselves as a company. We have to engage with the broader elements of society and government.
That's great. Last thought, Chris. A lot of people in the audience here are running their own startups. You have a particularly, I would say, complex task of running your business because you have a product that is going to take from the inception of your business probably 5 years before you ever ship anything that people will use. And there's a large group of people. How many people work at Aurora now?
440, 450-ish.
So you're managing a large group of people with a product that will take a long time to build.
Yep.
And so I want you to talk about your approaches to leadership and culture when faced with your type of problem of managing this business. In a minute.
In a minute. Impart wisdom in a minute.
No,
30
no.
seconds. So I think what we've been trying to build at Aurora is an environment where great people kind of work together with very low egos. So our problem is not something where we can have kind of a hero hacker in a corner, throw together a demo overnight, and then suddenly have 40,000 users the next day, right? As Mike said, this is a many-year investment. And the problem is broad, right? We hire all the different kinds of engineers, but then we have to work on government relations. And because we have all those engineers, we have to have high-quality human resource people. So it's really about recognizing that what we're doing is a team sport. And so one of our core values is we have no jerks. We have a rule, no jerks at the company. And it matters because we have to be in it for the long haul. It is a team sport. They have to be able to work together. And we've been successful in hiring world-class people across our organization. And so it may be that you're really good at the thing you do, and it's different than the person who sat next to you. And if you don't respect them, if you're kind of your ego gets in the way, then they're not going to be able to perform at their best, and we're going to fail. So keeping the team high horsepower, high quality people, but humble, I think it's been a core part of how we've been successful so far.
And I imagine that having a vision that says 40,000 people a year die on the roads in the United States, and if we fix this problem, that will be reduced in half or even less, has got to be motivating to the people that come to work every day.
Absolutely, and I think that's the other thing that I think about when we build a team is you need to have two things. Well, there's three things I think about for employees. One is they need a mission they believe in that's meaningful in the world. The second is that they have to have a job that they're excited about and great people to work with. And the third is you have to pay them in a way that's not embarrassing, that's fair, because everybody has crappy days. And so the mission is the thing that gets you through the crappy days. But if every day is crappy, it doesn't matter what the mission is. You're going to go find something else to do. And then if you're not being paid fairly, then why are you there? It's a job after all.
Chris, we're out of time, but I just want to thank you. It's a true privilege to be able to work with you. Not just because of the great mission, but because of the great person that you are. And more people should come work for you in case you're in one.
If you're looking, we are hiring.
And just thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, and good luck on the journey over the next few years.
Thanks, Mike.